Today we're discussing why Jess from Gilmore Girls is such a well-liked and meaningful character in the show. If I think he was the right match for Rory, why he's such a popular guy in the fandom. People really love this guy, not just because the actor's hot, although he is, but I think due to something deeper, which is how he resonated with so many of us and touched our hearts despite his whole bad boy exterior. When Jess is first introduced, he's obviously a loner, and he was a refreshing contrast to Dean, Rory's first boyfriend, who was very much stale, and Jess was just so needed. I mean, he brought something interesting, he brought a bit of danger, a bit of darkness. Her relationship with Dean, although it had been cute at first, really needed a change, and it was obviously going to come to an end at some point. I didn't like Jess in season 2 because of how unattractive his attitude was. He was moody, he was negative, and I was concerned about him being a bad influence on Rory. And I'm not saying that I didn't appreciate that he was a teenager figuring things out, but I was worried about him maybe not treating Rory with respect if they got into a relationship, because although he seemed to like her and fancy her, he seemed to have so many issues. I didn't see how a healthy relationship between them could work when he didn't even seem to have a healthy relationship with himself. As the show evolved, they grew to like Jess so much that they actually forgot how much of an ass he could be in the second season, or they just haven't rewatched the show in a long time, and in that case it is easy to forget why you disliked him when he was first introduced. But yeah, I didn't like him, although my feelings for him rapidly changed as I saw different sides of his personality. In season 3, Jess starts getting his shit together a bit more. He starts working at Walmart, and I like the character growth. That's a sign of good writing, when you can turn someone initially annoying or negative into someone who you admire. As the show evolves, Rory starts to have feelings for Jess as a love interest, even though she's already in a relationship with Dean, and she actually ends up cheating on Dean with Jess. It's important to note that she kisses Jess first.
Oh my god. Oh my god.
Rory.
Don't say a word.
Okay.
I have to go.
Although he was flirting with her, and I didn't really appreciate that he was turning her head, he never violated that physical boundary. He never went and kissed her because he was aware that she was with someone. As much as he enjoyed ruffling Dean's feathers and flirting with Rory, he knew that there had to be some kind of boundary there. Something I want to add that delayed Rory and Jess getting together was how Rory was really struggling to let her relationship with Dean go. She's finding it hard to release her relational identity because for so long she's been known as Dean's girlfriend, and so it's hard for her to accept that maybe she's not going to be with Dean anymore. Especially after her breakup with Jess, how she goes back to Dean again, it just shows that he's this familiar comfort to her. But that's one of the reasons why she was intrigued by Jess in the first place, was because of this drama and intrigue and mystery. Same with Tristan. She's like, who is this guy? He's exciting. I think she wants someone to bring out her wild side, her dangerous side, and you can see that with her very public displays of affection with Jess. She didn't really do that with Dean. Basically, I'm trying to nicely say that Dean was boring. That's one of the reasons why I really liked her with Logan, because he's a mix of all the boyfriends. He brings Dean stability, but also that excitement that Rory really craved. And so that's why they were such a good fit, because he offered both. I did prefer Jess at this point because I could see different sides of him, and I did think it was kind of sweet how he had this soft spot for Rory and he basically liked her the minute he laid eyes on her. However, I had a few people comment on my last Gilmore Girls video that Jess seems like a fake deep person, and I really agree with that in some senses, like where he says stuff and it's meant to sound deep but it's just kind of cringy and he's trying too hard to sound like, I don't know what it is. He just still rubbed me the wrong way a bit, but it's really funny that I liked him so much more by the revival. There are reasons that shouldn't be overlooked as to why Jess maybe wasn't the best when you look at the battle of the boyfriends, and Jess was a lot less emotionally whole when he met Rory compared to how he was at the end of the show. I could never fully get behind them being together. There was a point where I was very conflicted, where I liked him as much as I liked Logan and where I wasn't really sure. But when I rewatched certain scenes, the answer became obvious to me, that if they met as adults, I would probably really ship them together. But because of the timing with which they met, I don't know if I want them together. And this is probably going to be my most unpopular opinion about the show. And I know I have so many viewers who love Jess, and I want to let you know it's not like I'm dismissing Jess or invalidating him, or I don't see his value as a character. Quite the opposite. I'm making a whole video about him now because I do see his value as a character. However, I'm still very conflicted about the idea of him ending up with Rory. I'll explain. I'm glad she dated him. I think they're soulmates. However, just because someone came into your life to teach you something doesn't necessarily mean that they're there to stay or there to be with you forever. And each of Rory's boyfriends served a purpose. They taught her something, but that doesn't mean that she should end up with all of them. And I don't think she was meant to end up with Jess. In season 3, Jess and Rory were in a relationship where they seemed to be fighting more than they were happy together, or than they were just making out. And so their relationship seemed to be based on a lot of physical chemistry because the actors dated in real life. But I wasn't sure if it was sustainable or if it was something that would burn out quickly and messily. And I was very concerned about Jess doing something to hurt Rory, because when they met, he was kind of in a bad place. Jess is in a bad mood when they're at this party. He's been told that he had to repeat the year. He had a fight with Luke. Like, I understand why he's grumpy. But something that he does, and something that Luke also does, unfortunately, is that they take out their anger on the people around them, even the people they love. Him and Rory start making out, and then she asks him to stop. It's obvious that he wants to take things to the next level, but she's not comfortable taking that next step with him in this weird rush situation on someone else's bed at this party. The whole thing felt off. Obviously, she wanted to take her time. Then he starts getting really mad. He starts shouting at her. And then she starts crying, and she's like, I don't know what I did to make you upset. And then he feels bad, but the damage was done. That alone is enough for me to not want her to end up with Jess just because of that one scene. Because what he did was sexual coercion, not treating Rory with respect if they got into a relationship. Because although he seemed to like her and fancy her, he seemed to have so many issues. I didn't see how a healthy relationship between them could work when he didn't even seem to have a healthy relationship with himself. I know that it wasn't really the sex thing that bothered him. It was just more that he was in a bad mood and was annoyed at being told no about anything. But still, it was an ugly moment for him, and it didn't reflect well on their relationship as a whole. And it's funny how people tend to have double standards when it comes to Rory's boyfriends. So they'll point out all the mistakes that Logan made, or some communication issues he and Rory had at the beginning, and then idolize Jess, put him on a pedestal, and completely overlook this scene. This scene to me showed Jess's emotional immaturity, and that he wasn't really ready for something serious with anyone. And this was one of many signs which to me indicated that as much as I love Jess's character, I didn't really want him with Rory. And that's part of the reason I'm making this video, is just to let you know why I love Jess but not for Rory. And I already made a whole video about Logan and Rory's relationship, but I think a lot of people then were curious about what my issue was with Jess, and there is no issue. There's no problem. It's just that I don't believe that these two would work in the long term necessarily, and I wanted to explain why in more depth rather than just saying that without explaining it, especially because so many of my followers think these two are really good together. I don't think they were bad together, but I just think there's better options out there. And in general, with the way Rory's boyfriends were written, none of them were written particularly great. I'm gonna be real. None of her options were amazing. But Jess and Rory's communication in a relationship was also proven to be terrible. This was my issue. I started shipping them a lot in the build up to the relationship. The flirting, the angst, the forbidden love thing. I was kind of into it, not gonna lie. I was feeling some butterflies. I was. But then when they actually got together, and once the whole tension had died down and they were just living their life in a relationship, it's so weird. In the same way that there was all this anticipation I had for Luke and Lorelai being together, and I was like, when's it happening? When's it happening? When's it happening? Oh my God. Then they got together and I was like, oh, that's anticlimactic. Like, that wasn't as exciting as I thought it would be. It's the same for Jess and Rory. When they have a fight around the whole whole intimacy thing, him yelling at her. They need to talk it out. They need to explain what's going on. He needed to explain that he was in a bad mood, but they don't talk and they just avoid each other for a while because they're scared to have that real conversation. Relationships that function like that just will not work in the long term. You have to talk, especially in the early stages of dating when you have no idea what's going on in the person's head. And it's so funny because Logan and Rory had that exact same issue too, where they weren't really sure where they stood with each other in the beginning, and they kept not talking. Then Jess leaves town to see his dad and he doesn't tell her he's leaving, which was like, why wouldn't you just tell her? It's not that hard. At one point he got attacked by a goose or something and didn't tell her where he got the injury from. What was that storyline? I don't know. It was so weird. Like, he clearly doesn't feel safe just telling her stuff. But as soon as you accept that dating is about vulnerability and that it's not meant to be this game playing thing, that you should feel safe telling your partner things even if it's scary, that's a game changer when you realize that. And it takes courage. But it's not about playing it cool all the time or not texting back too fast because you don't want to seem desperate. It's about showing up and building a partnership together. And I don't think Jess and Rory were understanding that because how could they? They were teenagers. And that again ties into my timing issue with their relationship, which is that they simply met at the wrong time. Jess is the most fascinating male love interest out of all the boyfriends for sure. And I'll explain later why he's one of my favorite characters in the show. He's very complex. However, I don't think he was in the right headspace to be a good boyfriend, even though he's a good character. I do enjoy the I hate everyone but you trope sometimes, and I understand that he genuinely had feelings for Rory, but that's not enough. He was in a position to give Rory some love at that time when they started dating, to give her some trust, some enjoyment, but I don't think he could give her all the love she needed, and it wasn't enough. The whole town misunderstood him, which was a shame, and a lot of people thought he was worse than he was and misinterpreted his intentions, which was really unfortunate. But at the same time, Jess did have his flaws. He was messing around, he wasn't applying himself in school, he was breaking rules, and at that time, it wasn't the best influence for Rory to have in her life. And that's something I stand by, which is that you become like the people you surround yourself with. And it was the same thing when Rory started dating Logan, because sometimes he'd pull pranks when they were at uni. Like, he did this prank where he pretended to like attack one of his friends or something in the seminar, which granted was very funny, but he also drank quite a lot and sometimes would have a bit of a laissez-faire attitude. And again, even as much as I adore that boy, I don't think that Rory needed that kind of influence in her life, because I think she needed a guy who was also on track. And that's why I started liking Logan so much more when he started applying himself, and that's why I started liking Jess so much more when he started working, because I think it's important to apply yourself. And really the only difference between Jess and Logan is the privilege thing. And I do wonder if some of the reasons why people like Jess more than Logan is because of the financial differences between them. Logan could pay his way out of anything because he was so rich and he was raised very privileged. And I do believe that a lot of people resent him for that. And I know he can't change it, that's how it is, but a lot of people just found that rich boy thing very unattractive, whereas with Jess they understood that he couldn't get away with the same things that Logan could get away with. He'd be more punished by the world and disadvantaged in a way that Logan would never understand. Logan could get away with stuff when he messed up. He could slack off, he could face criminal offenses, and still he'd come out unscathed with no record, whereas with Jess it was harsher. But you need to see that there are similarities between Jess and Logan that can't be ignored, and maybe that's why I like them both so much as characters. But Jess has more of a moody, maybe unattractive attitude, and Logan was more happy-go-lucky because Logan genuinely feels more supported by the world. He doesn't need to worry about the same things that Jess worries about. And as much as I found Jess's attitude really annoying at points and just really unsexy, I'm going to be honest, I understand where it came from. They even both have shitty families. The only difference is that Logan has got more money, but both of his parents were neglectful or nasty in some way, especially his dad. And with Jess, his mum was really negligent and she had a bunch of horrible boyfriends, which created a lot of instability in Jess's life. So neither him or Logan had the most loving upbringings, and that gave them both insecurities that they needed to work with. That's one of the reasons why I felt bad for Jess in the same way I felt bad for Logan in some ways, because Jess wasn't taught normal communication skills. He wasn't No one explained to him how dating worked because no one took the time to invest in him. It's made worse and modeled to him through Luke's behavior because Luke doesn't really know how to talk to women. He gets so awkward. He even needed to read a whole book about dating before he finally realized he was in love with Lorelai. That's my main reason for sympathizing with Jess and why I like him so much as a character, because he's just like this lost kid. A lot of his mistakes were made in high school where, let's face it, everyone messes up. In contrast, when Rory starts making mistakes, it's when she's a lot older, and that's why it seems less understandable. This is why I do believe that Jess was too good for Rory by the end of the show and in the revival. He's learning, progressing, becoming a man, overcoming his trauma, and she's going backwards. Rory and Jess have so many parallels, which is why I think they're soulmates. For example, the fact that they both had teenage mums, except Rory's was loving and attentive, where Jess's was neglectful and out of her depth. In season 6, when we finally see Jess again, he's grounded. He's not as reactive, and I was unbelievably proud of him. Whereas with Rory, it's like there was this role reversal where now she was the messy one in a weird headspace. And words cannot even explain how proud I was seeing how he'd grown. Jess was kissed by Rory because she was doing it as some weird getting back at Logan, immature high school thing because she loved Logan so much. And that was an example to me of her choosing Logan. She chose Logan because she wants Logan, because they're a better match. But I was really proud of Jess for standing up for himself and respecting himself, because he said, I don't deserve this, when Rory had like kissed him. It wasn't fair on him for her to just treat him like an option in the same way that she just treated him like this disposable option around season 2. That's why I was a bit disappointed that he's still kind of holding a torch for her in the revival and still seems almost hopeful they'll be together. The final shot of Jess in the revival shows him looking through the window at Rory almost longingly, and I just don't know if I like that or not, because it seems like nothing's gonna happen or something would have happened, and I'm just like, I kind of want him to move on. I love that he's writing a book which shows that he's actually chosen to believe in himself, and I love that he's always giving Rory advice to get her back on track. By the revival, overall, Jess is an absolute catch. Not just potential, but he actually started to live up to it. However, I do think society likes to glamorize the bad boy. We see that through 365 Days. We see that in the Vampire Diaries with Damon, with, what else do we see it with? So many things. Jess definitely was just too much of like a bad boy loner type for me to really want him to be with Rory in the earlier seasons. It did kind of have a bad impression of me and leave a sour taste. The only way I could see it working is if maybe years after the revival, Rory calms down a bit and becomes more grounded, and then maybe they could finally meet in the middle, and then I could actually see it working when they're both adults. But I never saw that happen, and like I said, we barely got to see them actually be in a relationship, which makes it hard for me. Whereas I saw her navigating various obstacles with Logan in a relationship. And also, I don't really like to think of the revival as endgame because of so many writing errors. For example, the way they trashed Logan's character, for me, I don't like that. And so I don't really look at the revival as a way of determining who she should have been with, because I just like to look at the original show. And in the original show, for me, Logan was just by far a better option because he and Rory were both flawed, because they were both kind of spoiled. People can be mean. People can be really judgy towards Logan. I don't for the life of me understand why. In the same way that I think people can be a little bit blinded when it comes to Jess, and this is coming from someone who really likes Jess, okay? I don't see an issue with him. You can let me know, by the way, I'm not judging you if you like him and Rory together, but I just can't wrap my head around why people would prefer her with Jess. For those of you that do like her with Jess more, I've tried to look at it from that perspective and be like, okay, well, why would people think that? And I've got nothing. When Logan's there as an option, to me, he just outshines Jess so much in terms of who she worked better with. And I love Jess, but I want him to find someone better. If you guys still don't understand why I like Logan and you're confused, I made a whole video about like 21 reasons as to why they should be together, and I'll link it in the description along with my other Gilmore Girls videos. One of the reasons I wanted to make this video as well is because Jess is such an interesting character, but a lot of analysis of him is very simplistic, just describing him as a bad boy or the loner guy who wasn't good enough for Rory. And
He's actually a lot more complicated than that, and he's definitely a lot more well developed than other bad boy characters I've seen in the media. Also, maybe Rory ended up with no one because it was too difficult trying to please all the fans. Like, maybe they thought it would be a safer bet to just have her end up alone. Another reason why Jess is one of the best characters in the show is because he is allowed to develop as a character, and we get to know him outside of the Gilmore Girls. He has his own personality and his own arc. We see him visiting his family, and yeah, I really like that about him. Another thing I like is that when he starts writing his own book and picking himself back up again, sure, Rory inspired him to do that, but it was ultimately his decision, and he did it off camera. And I like that his relationship with Luke improved and things like that, and that's what makes him stand out compared to other characters like, let's say, Dean.
At the same time, I understand it's just a show as well, so if one person likes her more with Jess and another one likes her more with Dean or whatever, who really cares? You know, like, we're entitled to have our own opinions, and I do think there's a certain level of projection and self-inserting happening where we imagine who we would rather date and we put ourselves in Rory's shoes. So it's also about who you gravitate towards more. Some people just found themselves more attracted to Jess, and so they just gravitate towards him. For me, I found myself more invested in Logan. So it also just comes down to personal preference, maybe who you could see yourself with if you had to pick. Yeah, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Let's have a discussion, and I will see you for my next Gilmore Girls video.